This is a fight I've been very much looking forward to. Everyone knows what Bernard Hopkins brings to the table. Sergey Kovalev is someone I've been seriously following, since the fight with Nathan Cleverly. I was quite a big fan of Cleverly at the time. I thought he was the next big thing. Unfortunately mistaken. And Sergey Kovalev's performance against him, was absolutely chilling. Cleverly has got a very good chin. I understand he spars with Derek Chisora, for example. He's a tough guy, a durable guy. And we saw how Kovalev blew him out. This guy genuinely does hit very hard. It's a fascinating matchup because Hopkins always finds a way of upsetting the odds. I remember when he fought Tavoris Cloud, and certainly the bookmakers had Hopkins a favourite in that. Had Cloud a favourite in that fight. Hopkins seems to find a way to come up against younger fighters and beat them. Yes, there are exceptions to the rule. I know Hopkins has been beaten before. I think he's lost 6 times in total, so he is beatable. And he's lost to, the likes of Joe Calzaghe, who are obviously top fighters. But when a fighter beats Bernard Hopkins, they tend to be a special fighter. And it'll be a big test of Sergey Kovalev, this. Kovalev is someone with all big punchers, there tends to be a slight vulnerability to them. I've heard that Kovalev was dropped in sparring by Gennady Golovkin, who campaigns 2 weight classes below him. I don't expect Hopkins to destroy Kovalev in such a manner, because Hopkins isn't that kind of fighter. We also saw Kovalev touch down for a brief knockdown, even though it looked to be like more of a balance thing in his last fight. There are some signs of vulnerability. A big fear for myself is that Hopkins is never knocked out. He may be knocked out, but he never has been with all the guys who've tried. Kovalev hasn't been beyond 8 rounds. For a guy who has made a living off knocking people out and destroying people, that's potentially risky. I have the same worries about Deontay Wilder in the Stavern fight. How is Kovalev going to react when it goes 9, 10, 11 and 12? Rounds that Bernard Hopkins has fought time and time again, even time and time again recently. It leads me to think this is a competitive fight. And I think the other theory that I have that this is a competitive fight is Hopkins is the A-side in this matchup. One has to assume Hopkins had more options than Kovalev. Who would want to fight Kovalev? He's not huge money. He's not huge amongst the casual fans. He's got 1 belt. Hopkins is a much better known fighter, a bigger draw, 2 belts. Hopkins has obviously decided to take this fight. I understand he wants to unify the division, but I believe Hopkins wouldn't have elected to take this fight. Hopkins is someone who's very financially comfortable in his legacy. He wouldn't have taken this fight unless he'd have looked at Sergey Kovalev and seen a vulnerability there. It may be a technical thing. It may be he's seen weaknesses in Kovalev's game. Maybe he views Kovalev as one-dimensional. Someone he'll be able to tie up, hold, run away from, steal rounds from. It may be something like that. Or it may be that he sees someone who's purely a big puncher, and Hopkins is confident he can jag him late because Hopkins is so advanced in his own defence and his own durability. It's interesting. Either way, I don't think Hopkins would take this fight unless he was at least confident. And time again, Hopkins has gone in against these massive punchers and exposed them. And look at the Kelly Pavlik fight, look at the Tavoris Cloud fight. These were guys, Felix Trinidad, these were guys expected to beat Hopkins. Some of those guys were guys who were also massive punchers at the time, in terms of their records. Hopkins is very tough, very strong. He creates angles, which means he limits the damage he has to take. Now Kovalev looks as formidable, if not equally formidable, as any of those guys we've mentioned, if not more formidable, I should say. The way he's been dispatching people is very impressive. But in terms of who Kovalev's actually fought, it is a slightly weaker level of opposition, certainly, than Bernard Hopkins. Now, I'm not saying that's Kovalev's fault, because I would imagine there isn't a queue of people around the block to fight him. Nonetheless, it's easier to score knockouts when you're in against a lower level of opposition. Now, that's not to say Kovalev's been in against terrible opposition. As I say, I rate Nathan Cleverly quite highly. Guys like Cedric Agnew, Blake Caparello, these were unbeaten guys. He's been in with some decent, unbeaten, confident opposition who had came to win. But he hasn't fought at quite that level. And when you step up to fighting, the real elite, the real sort of top 10 pound for pound fighters, such as a Carl Froch or a Bernard Hopkins, you find that the knockouts are harder to come by. So I worry, because although Kovalev is a big puncher, so many big punchers have tried and failed to knock Hopkins out. And Kovalev needs to bring, I can imagine that's plan A, blow Hopkins out, but he needs to bring a plan B, because just being able to hit hard isn't going to be enough in this fight. He cannot expect to dispatch of Hopkins the manner he has with his last few fights. It's just not going to happen. For me, the fact that he's gone on, hasn't fought beyond 8 rounds is a major concern, but I appreciate, he brings a lot to the table. So I view this as a genuine 50-50 fight, I really do. And I think the way Hopkins comes on late in the fights, look at the John Pascal fight, for example, it's unlikely that Kovalev is going to be coming on strong towards the end of this fight, assuming it goes round. So I think a real fascinating encounter. I'm really looking forward to this one. I wanted to talk briefly about one observation I'd made after the HBO, I think they call it 24/7, Hopkins Vs Kovalev documentary. I believe it's the first part. There may be more parts to come out. It's about half an hour. I'd recommend anyone, who's interested in the fight to watch it. Very similar to the Marcus Maidana Floyd Mayweather, that series that they do. I forget what that's called. All Access. That's it. It's on a similar vein to that, but it's done very well. There's one observation I made from that is giving me cause for concern on the Kovalev side. Now, Bernard Hopkins, we know, is someone who studies boxing. We know he views it as a science. We know he works angles, and that's again highlighted in this. We see him teaching a youngster after sparring how to do like a shoulder style defense and how to hide behind your shoulder. And it's clear that he's the ultimate technician, the ultimate boxing scientist. And we've witnessed this time and time again, where he's just worked out ways of beating opponents. He's seen an opponent, he's studied them, he's adjusted his own game, and he's made the necessary changes to get the job done. Now, if we look at the Kovalev camp, whose trainer, John David Jackson, was a sparring partner for Bernard Hopkins, fought Bernard Hopkins in a professional ring, and then served as an assistant trainer to Nazim Richardson, and worked in Bernard Hopkins' corner for some time. This is a guy who knows Hopkins so well. Multiple sparring, a competitive fight, and worked in his corner. This is a guy who knows Hopkins inside out. And what was his sort of theory on how to get the job done with Hopkins? It was, remember, Bernard is an old man. We've got to not worry about what he brings. We've got to not worry about tactics. We've got to remember he's an old man, and we've got to knock him out. Now, I appreciate a trainer may not want to go into in-depth tactical analysis ahead of a fight, especially when the opponent's going to be able to watch that. But for me, that analysis from John David Jackson, the trainer, is all wrong. Sergey Kovalev shouldn't be viewing Bernard Hopkins as an old man. He shouldn't be viewing Bernard Hopkins as someone that there is even a remote possibility he may knock out in the first 2-3 rounds. If I was John David Jackson, I'd be thinking, my guy's never gone 8. This is a guy who has never been knocked out. I want to focus on winning rounds. I want to focus on, having the fitness and the stamina to go 12, when your style would be extremely energy sapping. That's the way I'd be looking at it. Obviously take the knockout if it comes, brilliant. You're a massive puncher, you always have the ability. But that wouldn't be the way that I'd go about training a fighter. I appreciate that Jackson is probably far more knowledgeable than myself in that, but I thought it was very, very strange. Saying we're going to knock him out, he's an old man, that's great. But how many young opponents have come in with that mentality to Hopkins? How many people have tried to beat him, and that just hasn't been able to happen? Sergey Kovalev may be the first, but on the balance of probability, this fight is going to go rounds. Hopkins isn't the sort of guy you blast out in a round or two. I may be wrong, but I think it's unlikely. Sergey Kovalev needs to bring tactics to this. I saw an article on Boxing Scene where he was quoted, rightly or wrongly, as saying he doesn't have any particular strategy. It's going to be like a barroom brawl. That's not good enough against Bernard Hopkins. Bernard Hopkins being an old man isn't good enough. Hitting hard isn't good enough. Whereas Bernard Hopkins will no doubt be studying Kovalev in great depth. He's been to Kovalev's fights in person, as we know. He was at the last fight. He'll be working out the angles. He'll be working out the adjustments he needs to make. He'll be looking how he can exploit any weakness he sees in Kovalev's game. He'll be keeping the fight in close when he needs to, so Kovalev doesn't have the range to land his power shots. It was just a small observation, but I thought that the contrast between the two, with Bernard Hopkins educating a sparring partner on defensive technique and adjusting your defence, compared to the Kovalev camp where they were saying he's an old man, knock him out. I think that's a real key difference, and that is one thing that has possibly made me lean towards Bernard Hopkins. Now, Sergey Kovalev clearly is a huge puncher, but men are made vaguely equal. He may be the biggest puncher Bernard Hopkins fought, but I struggle to believe he's the biggest puncher ever to have lived, or even if he is, that he's so far and away, that he's 10, 20, 30% better than the guys who've come before. His knockout record, whilst extraordinary, isn't against the calibre of opposition that Bernard Hopkins represents. If I was his camp, I'd be making sure I was fit for 12. He says he is, but so often fighters do. I'd want him to be, working 12, and I'd want him to be bringing a strategy assuming the fight's going 12. Thanks for watching, keen to hear people's thoughts.